What is up, maker community? Welcome back to your favorite non-woodworking podcast called Woodworking is Bullshit. I'm your host, Paul Jasper, woodworker at night, scientist by day, and I'm joined with my two fabulous, amazing, astounding, illuminating co-hosts, Eric Curtis, full-time furniture maker and content creator, and Mary Tasai, AI designer by day, contemporary furniture maker by night when she has power in her shop.
Thank God.
Welcome back, everyone. We're happy to record another episode. This is 2 episodes in the same week, so you're getting us fresh off our last episode.
Oh, yeah.
Today's episode is about a hot button topic. We thought we would poke the bear. This is a question I've always featured on my Instagram, and boy, does it elicit a lot of hot opinions, and that's why I suggested it. The question of today is CNC woodworking? Ouch. Yes. And there's going to be, now it's not going to be as simple as, well, it is or it isn't. I think I would like to start by coming up with some arguments why it should be considered woodworking. And I'd love to consider arguments where it's not and sort of deconstruct why people feel the way they do. So why don't we start with the people who say no, CNC should not be considered woodworking. So, for example, can the three of us think of ways or reasons why it should not be considered woodworking? So I'll start one. I'll say, no often stems from this pattern that many people who own CNCs, this pattern that they do where they basically have a CNC, they get it set up, they download some pattern files, and they just start cutting shit on it. And they say, oh, look at this thing I made. And it's like, well, you didn't design it. You didn't think about the wood. You literally downloaded like a pattern from a template file or some chat group on Facebook, and you hit go. That's a tough one. That's not really woodworking per se.
Are we going to play devil's advocate right off the jump and argue yes and no? Because I could say, like, everybody starts off making cutting boards, and what you do is you buy a table saw and you buy S4S lumber from the lumber yard, and you just cut straight lines and glue it back together. That's no different than putting a piece of wood on a CNC and cutting out a shape. It's the exact same process. It's a mechanical process where you're not considering design, material, final object. So what's the difference?
Oh, I like that.
Well, some people would say that you do quote unquote design the cutting board, even if it's in the simplest form.
Oh, wait. Time out. Mary, you said the word that I think we're going to come back to, which I think is a differentiator, is the word design.
Oh,
all right. So just
I thought you were going to say simple.
No.
Yeah, that's what I
thought too. No. So I would just want to put that word design in the back of your head, because I think that's where may go to ultimately. Okay, so back to it. So Eric, I asked you a few days ago about can you come up with an argument for why CNC should not be considered woodworking? And you said the following, and I quote, because I know you did. Did you write it down?
No, I don't remember what I said at this point.
Well, it was surprisingly eloquent and
I don't know why you're surprised by my ability to articulate my thoughts and emotions, sir.
So you said, and I quote, "It undermines the development of traditional skills. It's the antithesis of self-reliance and forces the contemporary woodworker to become reliant on gizmos and gadgets sold to us by big tech companies whose highest purpose is to get us to become slaves to a subscription service." End quote.
I'm the most pompous of assholes. Now, I will say this. I wrote that you asked us to come up with an argument why CNC is not woodworking. And that was written from the point of view of somebody who believes that. That is not I want to put that into the universe right now. That is not my personal viewpoint. However, I do think it is a fair argument to make that
I would agree.
the death of quote unquote skill, or let's call it craftsmanship, because we're talking specifically about woodworking, because CAD work is a skill, right? And a valuable skill at that. But when we're talking about like the artisanal aspect of cutting dovetails or whatever the fuck you want to talk about, there is an argument to be made that taking that out of the hands, taking the saw out of the hands of the craftsperson and having repeatability replace it is a detriment to the continued development of skill and craft.
Now, Mary, I asked you the same question. I said, can you think of an argument why it should not be considered woodworking? And by the way, for the audience, we started with no because I think to come up with no arguments is actually harder. Because the truth is, the three of us think it is pretty much woodworking, and that comes easy. We can think of a million reasons why it is considered woodworking. But I wanted to challenge us and lead off with the devil's advocate view. Like, why? When is it not, or when should it not be considered woodworking? So, Mary,
I don't know. I guess maybe it kind of you're gonna make fun of me again, but it kind of depends on your definition of woodworking.
Oh, like, this girl and definitions, man.
I love definitions. No, but like, if what you consider woodworking is going to be totally different from someone else. So yeah, I think the three of us have a pretty similar viewpoint of utilizing woodworking in your craft is obviously like, I mean, CNC in your woodworking craft, like I think that makes sense. But the argument that I can think of is I know like some people maybe on like Etsy who just do it for batch production and they don't know much about how wood works or think about grain direction or like the design, and they just downloaded like a specific template or something off of I don't know some website. Like maybe that would be the case. I don't know. I personally still think there's a bit of a I don't know some sort of skill there, but that would be my argument that I could think of.
Well, Mary, in fact, in our private group chat, you asked ChatGPT what the reasons.
Always.
and you don't seem to remember what ChatGPT told you.
I don't remember. I can pull it
Okay,
up
well,
unless you have it.
Of course I have it.
Okay.
So ChatGPT argued one argument is automation versus manual skill. Woodworking is part of a tradition where manual skills are highly regarded and respected, like carving and sawing and joining, whereas automation further reduces the hands-on skill that built this craft. So it gets us away from the hand skills that perpetuate it. Second, artistry and individuality. So each piece created by a traditional woodworker can be unique, reflecting that artisan's personal touch, decision-making, and spontaneous adjustments during the crafting process, whereas CNC machines, on the other hand, produce items based on a preset design of parameters, which leads to uniformity throughout thousands of pieces of production. So an artistry piece. The third is that knowledge and intuition, that woodworkers often develop a deep understanding of the intuition about their materials. For example, different types of woods, how they work, how to, grain direction, how to accentuate certain grain patterns when you make things. And Eric, I know you and we do that all the time, whether it's sapwood and whatnot. CNC operators may not feel that so deeply. They may just chuck a piece of wood on and saw it up, right? Now I'm generalizing. We're coming to why CNC is woodworking. So don't lose your shit on me, okay?
I find myself weirdly like having to hold back against arguing against these points right now. But we're making the point as to why it's not woodworking right now.
Right. And finally, cultural and historical aspects. This is a craft that we love, right? The three of us deeply love this craft. It has a rich history and a huge cultural significance over, centuries, if not millennia, where hand tools and techniques were passed down through generations. CNC technology does not connect us to this heritage in such a deep and instant way. It has a little bit of a wall with it at the moment. So, Mary, those were your ChatGPT answers. I thought they were quite good. I obviously agreed with all of them, or I wouldn't have read them.
Of course, that's what ChatGPT is good at, like analyzing all the thoughts that people have on the internet and summarizing. I'm a big fan.
So, so let's. I just want to do one more small conversation about the no part. For those people in the community who are like, no, it's not. Is there something that they feel, or I mean, beyond these reasons, is there a feeling they're saying no? Why are they gatekeeping what woodworking is for the rest of us? Why can't they be
Well,
more
it's
fluid?
go ahead,
My
Mary.
question is, these people who say that it's not woodworking, have they ever used a CNC?
The vast majority have not.
Exactly. So that would be my question to them. Like, maybe try it and see how you could enhance your current skill set with it. Like, yeah, I feel like a lot of people just like do not use it because they have this mindset of like, oh, I absolutely don't want to, utilize technology or anything. I don't know.
I don't look. I'm gonna label it as loss aversion. Right, that's the improper way to label it, but I think it's not dissimilar.
What'd you say?
I'm
Loss
gonna
what?
loss aversion.
Oh,
loss aversion.
Definitely thought you said virgin for some reason.
Lost virgins. Lost Virgins is going to be the name of my autobiography, but that's neither here nor there. So
we know your new history.
The idea we've gone down that road.
Eric, you will not be naming your autobiography "Lost Virgins."
You listen. You don't want to put money on that, buddy. No. Here's. I'm going to make this argument in defense of these people. In a way, I think actually does matter or ring true. So you're talking about a group of people. We're going to generally assume that they're older folks because most often the oldest folks are the ones who are most against, upcoming technologies. And
Ageism.
In our particular instance, I mean, it might be, but like,
No,
I don't think I'm wrong by the numbers.
I'm just kidding.
I think that this is a group of people who have spent a lifetime developing a skill. And many of them, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say many of them have become very good hobbyists. And then you have a thing come along and a bunch of fucking 20-something-year-olds who know better than they do because every 20-year-old knows how to make the world a perfect place and the generations before them have failed to make a utopia. And they have this technology to...
That was amazing, by the way.
It's ageism again, but in the reverse. They have this technology that allows them to master the skill that this person has spent 50 years fucking figuring out and getting good at. And they can do it in a matter of days. And part of it is anger. Part of it is frustration that they didn't have that same opportunity. But part of it is like a self-defense of saying like, you don't understand the value of what you're doing until you spend the time developing the skill to be able to do it. I don't remember who it was, and this is a poor parallel, but I don't think it's inappropriate. There was a philosopher who basically equated taking mushrooms to, and like having kind of that spiritual experience that comes along with hallucinogens, to skipping the process of developing the skill set needed to get deep into meditation and experience the spiritual world in that regard. It's that same kind of shortcut. And I feel like that's where so much of that vitriol is coming from, of this thing of I had to spend decades getting good at a thing, and you don't even understand the value of what you're doing at this moment, and you can just do it.
Do you think there's truth in that?
I think there is truth in that. I don't know that it's self-awareness. Like I don't think a lot of those folks are aware that that's why they're frustrated, but it is that loss aversion of like, so what you're telling me is I just wasted the last 50 years of my life. I could just wait until 2024 and tell a machine to do it, and I didn't have to.
Well, specifically what I'm asking, Eric, is did those people putting in the years and the time, did that give them a skill set or a perspective that makes their work more meaningful or let's say has more significance in a way than simply a computer carved thing?
I don't know that it does, but I think that it can. It has the the availability of appreciation is greater because of the amount of time that you've spent with the skill, with the craft, with the object, what have you. Versus when you spend 5 minutes with a thing because you just put it on the CNC bed, you hit a button, and then you were, surfing the web and looking at, I don't know, I'm not going to make a dick joke there. Whatever you're looking at.
Well,
I'm looking at.
I would certainly argue,
like, there's a disassociation there.
I would certainly argue that my 15 years of woodworking prior to getting my CNC very, very much changed how I see the CNC fitting into my creative process, how I think about wood, interacting with it, the grain orientation, what I want to do with it. I can't say what the opposite would be because I didn't live it. I only have one vantage point, which is 15 years of machine and hand tool, more very traditional woodworking prior to the CNC. So I kind of get that there is some value in earning your stripes kind of in the tradition and then using the new technology to accelerate, like learn the rules before you break the rules kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that's exactly the argument. And so, like, as an example, and this is not the example of the extent to which one can use a CNC, but I think it's a pertinent example. The desk I'm sitting at right now, the top is made from curly eucalyptus, and it sucked. It was a real pain in the dick. Okay. But when I flattened it, I used the CNC to flatten it. I just programmed it to, to take off as many passes as I need and got it flat. I have flattened slabs by hand. I have flattened slabs with a router jig. When I put this thing on the CNC and hit the button and literally sat down and read a book, the amount of gratitude I felt for the CNC that I didn't have to do that fucking grind work was immense. And that's a thing that you don't experience unless you've done it the other way.
A great point. Great example. So some people think that whether something qualifies as woodworking is that it simply needs to be made out of wood. Is that too permissive of a definition?
I don't think so. I think that's how I define it.
Yeah,
that's my
kind
of guiding principle creatively. I call myself a woodworker because my core medium is wood.
Okay, so would someone who walks into a CNC shop off the street, never touching wood before, and they load a block of wood onto the CNC and hits the button to execute the program, are they a woodworker?
Oh, that's a good question, and I think I have an answer, but I'm going to let Mary answer first.
It's a good question. Oh man, because I want to say yes, but doesn't feel right to say that for some reason in my mind. I don't know. Okay, so this is somewhat tangential, but related. When I was in grad school, I took furniture design class, and a lot of these students who were undergrads, they did not know, traditional principles of woodworking. They hadn't really built furniture before. They did see the advantage of a CNC because they came up with the most incredible designs that I never would have been able to think of. And a lot of that is because they're so new to this field. They're not limited by rules and limitations. 1, 2, they have ability to access software like 3D modeling, things that, we would not normally incorporate into our woodworking process, but they have access to all these things, and they come up with the most incredible designs and put that on the CNC because they know, oh yeah, I know that this machine can't produce this. And in that case, I would have argued maybe they were a woodworker. Maybe it's more of they consider themselves designers. I would actually say that they would consider themselves designers and not woodworkers. And this is also something that is talked about in the industrial design field too, for people who design furniture, and they know how it's made, but they don't do it themselves. So they consider themselves industrial designers, just furniture designers, but not actually woodworkers. So it has to do more with the medium.
There's that word again, design.
Yeah, for sure. So I know I didn't really answer your question. I don't. I don't really
Yeah.
have a good answer.
Yeah,
for that.
what? No. Why don't you answer the damn question? And Eric, I know you're chomping at the bit to answer
Yeah.
that, but let's
Well,
let's
no,
hold.
I want her to define it first.
Yeah, let's hold Mary.
Oh my God.
For those who haven't noticed, Mary fucking asks me to define every
Loves the
goddamn
definition.
thing at the front of every episode. We're like, hustle culture. How do you define hustle culture? Burnout. How do you define burnout? Mary, you fucking know how to define burnout. Why are you playing the fool with me?
But not everyone does.
Okay, Mary. So you take someone off the street. His name's like Roberto. You take Roberto off the street and you put him on a CNC machine. You're like, Roberto, take this slab of pine, stick it on the machine, and hit the green button. Is Roberto a woodworker?
I guess in my perspective, no.
Wow.
Wow, really taking a hard stand against Roberto, huh?
God, Mary.
Anti-Roberto.
That's fine.
Okay, Eric.
Fucking elitist, but that's
Eric,
fine.
you're chomping at the bit.
Well, okay,
All right,
wait. Hold on. So the way you set that scenario up, he doesn't have any part of the setting up of the CNC. He doesn't do.
This is my point.
Anything?
This is my point.
All right. Go ahead.
So here's what I want to say. I want to throw in a new word because we're talking a lot about design. I'm going to throw in the word independence because Roberto in this particular scenario, I don't think is a woodworker. If Roberto can walk in, if you give him a couple of weeks, if you give him a month, 3 months, whatever the training period is, and he can walk in and he knows how to set up the CNC and he understands and knows how to read the CAD files and he can manipulate those CAD files as needed or plant them on the CNC properly in order to then cut the parts, then I'm going to make the argument that he is a woodworker. The same as Mary trying to differentiate designer from woodworker. They don't have the independence in a wood shop, sans CNC, to make objects. So they're not woodworkers, but they do have the independence to come up with creative and interesting designs. And so they are designers.
There's the word again, design. That's the third
but
time.
I think I don't know that there's a way to talk about woodworking and design separately,
Okay.
but I think
All
the point I'm trying to make is I think maybe that the skill set developed far enough, deeply enough that you can be independent in your work. Whether it's good or not is not the point, but you can go from A to Z in your work without somebody holding your hand. That takes you from apprentice to journeyman. And that's when I think that you can say that you're a woodworker or whatever skill set you're developing.
I like it. That's good.
Yeah, it kind of depends on there's different kinds of woodworkers. There's people who are hand tool woodworkers, power tool woodworkers. Like this is just like a CNC woodworker, a digital woodworker of some sort. It's just another category.
Okay, just a very quick 1 minute aside. Mary, you just said there's hand tool woodworkers, machine woodworkers. What percent are you machine versus hand tool?
I'd say I'm more machine, probably like 70-30.
Eric?
I mean, realistically, I'm probably around that same thing, 70-30. I try to incorporate hand tools as much as I can, but, I also have a mortgage to pay.
I'd say I'm 60-40. 60% hand tool, 40% machine. Something about that, yeah. I'm a little more hand tooly.
So I'm curious, are we just saying overall use of tools?
Yeah.
Or are we weighing the import of the process that is being accomplished with those tools, right? Because
I was
ripping wood by hand doesn't matter if you do that with a table saw or not. Yeah, it's stupid.
Yeah.
But if you're routing profiles versus hand planing profiles, and that affects the way you approach the piece.
I was just overall time in the shop.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, I don't want to get off the CNC argument. I was just curious. That was an interesting point. I wanted to chase that. So now we've given due course to when CNC is not or cannot be considered woodworking, or we don't consider it wood. There's no absolutes here, but now let's talk about when it is considered woodworking, because I think that's our basic set point for the three of us, right? The basic argument, and I think everyone feels this, and you guys tell me if you feel this too, is that it's just another fucking tool in the shop. Just the way the table saw was, right? Just the way a router was, just the way a shaper, it's just another tool. And you need a good woodworker to figure out when to use it, to, distinguish the use cases for it, to, tastefully use it in the right way. Okay. Is that where you guys are at?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, so that's the summation 100%. Yeah.
All right. So if that's the case, it's just another tool in the tool belt. And I'm, for the listeners, sorry, it's 25 minutes in and we're just getting to how you feel. I know most of you probably feel this way, but we thought it would be interesting to play devil's advocate with ourselves, because that's what we do. This podcast isn't about like consensus thinking and bandwagon. Like, I do enjoy, and Eric and Mary, we do enjoy kind of challenging our own views to see why we think that way. Is there another way to look at it? So that's why we do things like this. So given that I think the most of us feel like it's just another tool in the tool belt, why is there growing pains about this tool? Look, we've done this before. It used to be pit saw, right? Sawing lumber in a pit saw back in the 1800s or whatever the fuck. And then the table saw, right? Or the band saw came online. And it's like, there's been case after case after case of a tool replacing a manual labor approach. We've seen this 15 times in a row. How do we not recognize this is just another step in the same evolution?
Because tribalism. Like, we want to belong to a group, and when you belong to the group that says that this upcoming generation isn't as good as the generation that I'm a part of, then you immediately, like, you're validating yourself. This is what we do. Like, people shat on millennials for the last 20 years. Now everybody's like, fucking Gen Z don't even want to work 40 hours a week, And Gen Xers are like, we didn't even have a part of the conversation. I don't understand what happened.
Hey, bitch, I'm Gen X. Watch yourself.
It's how it goes. It's how it goes.
Watch yourself, bitch.
Listen, boomer, I don't know what to tell you, buddy.
I'm not a fucking boomer. I'm Gen X.
No, I think a big part of it is just belonging to a cohort of people, and that echo chamber that's created by the internet of saying like, hey, we're right. Yeah. And then everybody chimes in and like, absolutely, we're fucking right. This is not a tool. It's fucking dumb. And everybody sucks now.
Eric, you gave me another quote in our private chat that is more or less the same answer, but God, did your eloquence in the group chat was so good. I'm going to quote it again, and it's more or less what you just said, but I think it's worth quoting because it was quite good. Ready? I see you turning red.
That's because, well, first of all, it's hot in here. Second, because I think I brought up some political points, which, I don't want to shit on people for, but fine, we'll read it.
Okay, no, I will skip the political points for your to save you. We have an innate desire to belong to a group. And by definition, a group means that some people aren't in it. Throw in a healthy fear of technology and loss of individual agency, and it becomes iRobot. It's not sponsored by iRobot. And by the way, I have 2 Roombas in my house, and I fucking love them. Just for the record.
Me too.
I love them with a capital
I don't know. I don't know that I'll ever have a Roomba. This is like weirdly where I draw the line.
So, you
I know. It's a weird line to draw.
So, Eric, one of the phrases that I thought was really interesting is you said a fear of technology. And I do not have that fear. I'm a child of computers. I built computers when I was a teenager. I use computers in my job. I code. I do modeling. So, with regards to that phrase, fear of technology, is the fear component that we risk losing certain traditional art forms as more people embrace technology that can kind of make it more easy and approachable? Is that the fear? Where's the fear component?
Well, the fear is the unknown, right? And I'm gonna push back against you saying that you don't have a fear of technology. I know you're very open to technology, and we all grew up with computers, but let's just take AI, for example. The world is flipping out about fucking AI for the last 12 months. it not because it's any different from what we know, but because we don't know. And so there will come a point, I think, in all of our lives where we hesitate with a piece of technology, and it might get us to pause and question things. And I think that's the unknown that I'm pointing at. Some people will respond negatively to that, but that's the unknown. And to that unknown, I think the fear then drives to, well, this is the death of craft. It's the same thing. When the camera came out, people are like, fucking painters are dead. Like, what's the goddamn point? There's not going to be any reason to paint anything anymore. And what happened was painting went from a craft to an art. And I think the same thing is going to happen in furniture, of now that you have the ability to produce things at speed faster than any human can possibly make. You can make a chair on a CNC in literally minutes. So the idea of making a chair by hand is going to be relegated to the hobbyists and to the people who take the chair and push it forward in form. And some people would call those folks artists. So I think it's just going to shift from being seen as a craft to being seen as an art form or a form of self-expression.
I think like fear of technology, it's not a bad thing. Like, I think everything should always be questioned, obviously. It's just whether or not your fear is being pushed upon others, and you're letting it then cloud your judgment of how other people use it. So like, if you choose not to use technology yourself, sure, all for it. But I don't think, like, where it becomes unhealthy and probably negative is when you decide to degrade other people for not embracing your viewpoint on that.
Well, that's the tricky part of it, though, right? Because I am a big believer in, we need both sides of the coin. We need the people who are going to push things forward and try new technologies and take risks. But you also need the people who are going like, hey, dog, you might want to think about that for a half second before you do it.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, those are valuable people.
Eric,
And
that's
I'm
a great
definitely
point.
I'm in the former camp for sure. But I also value when people are like, hey, have you thought about this though?
That's like my job every day, where my team's like, we're in charge of AI, but also we want to make sure, is this right?
This is from my ignorant standpoint about AI. I think it's hilarious, the amount of fear that's happening about AI right now. But I also value that conversation is happening, because without that, the unchecked progressing of AI would probably lead to some terrible things. But I think it's very funny that people are like, AI is going to destroy the world. I'm like, listen, they're going to eat up all the books in the next 2 years, and then AI is going to stall until we provide them with more books. Like, that's what's going to happen.
Well, for those that don't know, our previous episode, which will be released tomorrow, May 1st, is on AI. So if you want to hear more about, go back one episode if you haven't already. Mary, I wanted to ask your point on this. Do you think we risk losing certain traditional art forms due to innovation and technology? For example, does the laser technology cutting out marquetry or cutting out shapes, does that lead to a loss of traditional market? Does it threaten traditional marquetry, for example?
Possibly. I mean, I feel like the younger generations are probably going to rely on what is easier and faster. However, those who are truly interested are probably going to want to know the history behind it as well. So if you become interested in a subject, hopefully, if you have a creative and curious mind, you'll also want to understand what the other possibilities are to create that thing, and, understand the history behind it. That may not always be the case. I might be giving younger generations too much credit, but I guess to answer your question, yeah, possibly, but also, does it matter?
I would argue it does. I'm a bit of both. I tend to learn the traditional method first, and I do it for a couple years, and then I treat myself to the technology version. And because
I was the opposite. Because I grew up in a world of computers, 3D graphics, and modeling. So I learned that first, and then I became interested in it, and then went in the opposite direction.
Well, that's really interesting because I think it proves the point that there's no one way or right way to do this. Um, but yeah, I absolutely have an interest in the traditional hand tool methods because I enjoy them. I definitely enjoy them more than programming a CNC or programming a computer. I'll tell you that much. Sitting there doing it by hand, at least most of the time, it just gives me a peace and a quiet and a meditation that I enjoy a little more than being in front of a computer, probably because my job is in front of a computer. So I want to get away from the computer. I think that's a big piece of it. I want to switch gears now, and it comes back to this word tech design that I kept saying. Remember this word design, and the reason I feel like design is so important. I was talking to my friend John Welch, John Francis Designs on Instagram. John is a CNC expert. He has run a CNC shop, helped run that made pasta extrusion dies for 20 years. And he's in his early 40s. He's not old. Like he's done this since high school, right? Kind of thing. And so John now runs a full-time woodworking business and he makes ravioli molds using the CNC machine. And I asked John, like, when does CNC to you feel like woodworking and when does it not? And I asked John because he also does a lot of classic woodworking, a lot of textures and a lot of carving. And I asked John his opinion, and he came up to the definition that it really hinges on this idea of design. Like if you're going to a CNC and you're designing a beautiful piece, like whether it's on a computer or you're drawing it and then you put it in the computer, like the element of the element of doing the design is a part of what makes it woodworking. And I think both of you said that earlier, that designing the piece is part of like, yes, that's woodworking. Whereas if you just download a program and push a button, no, that doesn't really feel like woodworking to us. That design is part of this, I don't know, part of the process. And John,
think of this group. That's not surprising at all. We all equate design and woodworking together, as opposed to people who consider woodworking just a craft and a way to make something. So we all have similar viewpoints on that, I think.
Yeah, so that's why I kept harping on that word design, because I feel like the intuition about using the CNC. So one of the points he brought up was that CNC is a great tool for rapidly iterating design ideas, because he couldn't rapidly iterate them nearly as fast without a CNC. He could go from idea to pilot project to just see if the idea holds water in a matter of 30 minutes. And if he had to do it by hand, it would be days. So it's an iterative technology. It allows us to explore our ideas. So I would ask the two of you, are there certain designs or design ideas that the shaper or the CNC has allowed you to do that you couldn't otherwise do?
Several joinery components that if I had to build 4 to 5 separate jigs to knock this thing out, it would have been a nightmare. But I can do the files on the Shaper Origin and then implement them in a matter of minutes. I don't even have to go to my computer. I can do it right on tool. And then all of a sudden I'm playing with, different exposed through tenons that add an element to a piece that I never would have done in a traditional sense, because I'm way too lazy to build a 4-stage jig. Are you kidding me? There's no way I'm doing that. And if I do it, I'm never building another piece. I'm never building another iteration of that. I'm certainly not seeing if it works,
Yeah, to speak on your friend's point of like iterating, for me, that is 100%. I can 3D model faster than I can sketch, because that is just how I was trained. It's all I knew my entire life. So the ability to just like throw something into a 3D, I use Rhino, but into a 3D modeling program and see the form come to life is so much faster. And the fact that I can copy it and make small changes, as opposed to starting over like a new sketch or having to use trace paper, etc., and then throwing that into a laser and just very quickly modeling up a prototype, that is so much faster for me. So I can definitely relate to that.
Well, I would say for me, the ability, the CNC has enabled designs that I would never even think to try by hand. Like, for
Mm.
example, some of the Japanese patterns. How the fuck are
Mm-hmm.
you going to do those by hand? Thousands of lines in like a very
Mm-hmm.
precise, geometry. I don't. How are you going to do that by hand? I mean, I know you can. I know pencil it out and you'd carve it one by one, and you can, but I wouldn't do it. I don't want to give 2 months of my time to just trying a pattern. But so patterns and intricate designs and computer generated designs have been entirely enabled. That CNC, I got to tell you guys, I never thought I would really need a CNC or enjoy it in terms of design. That thing gets used on every single project I do now. It is the most underrated tool in my shop. I'm so surprised, Eric. Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I'm curious. You were bringing up patterns,
Yeah.
and the first thing, like I'm seeing that kind of Japanese kind of kumiko style pattern that you've
Yeah.
done a lot of inlays in, and I'm wondering, is that why kumiko has had kind of a rebirth? Like, is it the taking the hard path to gain what they assume is value in there rather than a pattern? Like the kumiko pattern could be done on a CNC. Like you
Oh, I
could
do it
hog
all.
out all of that waistline.
I do it all the
You
time,
know?
and I've seen it
Yeah,
done. I've seen it done on a
yeah,
CNC.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, like everybody's doing fucking kumiko these days. And like, look, I don't mean to be a dick. Kumiko is not interesting. Like, it's not unique. It's not like something new. It's kind of a boring pattern.
I
It's
totally
stagnant.
disagree. I couldn't disagree more, you prick.
And that's fine.
I think
That's fine. That's what you're allowed to disagree.
No.
I'm just curious if that's why
Huh.
like it has this resurgence right now, or at least it feels like this resurgence of when it becomes able to do digitally, repetitively, then this desire to do it the hard way, quote unquote, has a rise.
Well, I don't think so because the 90, I've only seen one person use a CNC to do a Kamiko, actually do like a proper Kamiko. The other people are all doing it by hand. And I don't think those people have CNCs. So I think they just like Kamiko because it looks nice. So you're wrong, prick. I think it looks great. And
I want to fight. I want a fight to happen.
Yeah, me too. Because I think Japanese patterns are amazing, and I force myself, Eric, you little prick. I force myself. I'm just kidding. I love you. I force myself to draw them de novo. I don't download them. I draw them de novo to learn about the geometry. Is it 60, 30, 60, 90 kind of isosceles triangles or the equilateral triangles? And that's part of my enjoyment of learning about other cultures. And I've done many Japanese patterns, and the only way I would have used them is the CNC. I would have never even tried this shit if I didn't own a CNC. So the CNC has opened up huge areas of design to me. And it's not just the I'm going to make an MDF form kind of CNC use, or I'm going to batch out a stupid sign CNC use. That's fine for signs. I don't mean to, who any of our listeners.
Oh, who's the prick now?
Any of our listeners who use CNC for signs, I apologize in advance. It's fine. I'm actually going to do a sign in the next few months, so I apologize. But you know what I'm saying? Like the use case is far more broad than maybe we realize that for CNC.
So this is, I want to push back again on the use of design, because what it sounds to me like you're doing, you are designing, but you're taking the Kumiko pattern and you're iterating it. You're trying to come up with something different, and you're doing it independently. Like you're not reliant on somebody else to figure out what choices you should make. And I think that that's a key differentiation, because we keep talking about, is CNC woodworking. And it's not if you come in and you hit a button, but for at the risk of alienating some of our audience, perhaps, I'll play the devil's advocate then and say, under that definition, the people who buy plans on the internet and go to their shop that doesn't have a CNC in it and just make a fucking table or a chair or what have you aren't woodworkers, because they're not designing anything. They're just making a thing.
No, I see your point.
Right? There's no, it's hard to differentiate those two things.
I accept your point reluctantly, but that's a good point. Okay,
So
I have
it's hard.
It is. I have one last, I think, really hot button question, which is a lot of people feel as though handmade items have a soul to them. They feel precious. You can see the hands of the maker in the piece. You see the idiosyncrasies. You can see some of the mistakes. I don't want to call them mistakes, but I would say imperfections, right? And that's beautiful to many people. Human imperfection is a beautiful thing. And it reminds them when they look at that piece, they look at the imperfection, something that's not quite 90 degrees or not quite perfect in some regard. And they look at that thing and they think, I'm picturing the person making that at their bench with a chisel. And it connects them through time, longitudinally, to that maker in their mind. And it brings a sense of connection. It brings a sense of value. It brings a sense of humanness to it versus literally perfectly machined everything. Now, is there a value proposition here? When I asked this to my Instagram audience, the vast majority said that they would prefer the handmade human item. Mary, you were one of the few people who pushed back on that. Please, why don't you offer why you pushed back on that?
I don't quite remember exactly what it was, but I will give my perspective. I do value the handcrafted piece. I think that it is unique and original, and I do like that I can connect to the maker in it. However, I also very much appreciate some mass-produced objects. I think there is a beauty in them, and when I look at them, I think about the original designer of it. I think about the process that they went through to create this piece that can be so pleasing to hundreds and millions of people. And I find a lot of interest and passion in that perspective. So it's not necessarily the production of the piece itself. It's interest in the design process behind it and what the designer went through to get to that and why it stands out to me and how it blends into the way that I utilize it and other people utilize it, if that's the same way. And so I think there's value in both of it. And of course, I think our audience is always going to be more handcrafted because it's woodworkers, that is this specific medium. I am probably thinking on more of an industrial design level, something that is, I don't know, I guess mass produced and things like that. But I look at an iPhone and I think there's beauty in it because there's so much thought that went into every single curve, every single shadow line, every parting line. Just, I don't know, maybe it's a different way of viewing objects, but that's my own perspective.
So Mary, that is a fabulous answer because I think all of us were like, well, you see an imperfection, it connects you to the maker from a handcrafted point of view, but you see good design elements and it connects you to the maker because
exactly.
That I've never really thought about that. That's excellent.
Yeah, because I went to school for this. I know how hard it can be to actually think of something that final product ended up being and how many iterations that it went through. So I understand the process and I understand that not everyone gets what went into it. So Mary, that's why I appreciate it.
That is an awesome answer. Thank you for sort of opening my mind to thinking about I will definitely think about objects from that perspective from now on. Thank you. So Eric, what do you think?
Maybe the greatest value judgment conflict, the thing that was posed to me in the middle of a critique that challenged me the most was Peter Korn. We were doing a crit when I was a fellow up at CFC, and it was a person was making a chair, and they had a very rustic style, and they wanted all of these hand details. but they were batching out parts on the CNC. The reason that she was there was to learn to use the CNC and improve the workflow of her business. And I was giving my feedback on the object, and I articulated something about like, you know, if there was just like a detail here, something about the handwork, it might elevate the piece. And Peter stopped me like mid-sentence. Now I've known Peter for 15 years, so he's one of those guys who'd be like, "Stop being a fucking idiot. Like, let's think about this actually." And he said, "I would hesitate to use the word elevate because you're putting a value judgment on this object and assuming that handwork is better than production work, when in fact it's actually harder to design a piece for mass production that is successful and beautiful than it is to make one by hand." And I don't think he was wrong. Like it is a harder skill because there are so many more I know what tools I have in my shop. I know my workflow. I know how to make a chair. If I were to design a chair and then have somebody else go and make it, that's an entirely different. This is why I argue that IKEA is actually brilliant. Sustainable? No, but brilliant. Like it is so well designed because I can put a thing together from IKEA and not read any English in the manual. Wow. So it's a tricky thing because then on the other side of that coin, there is some intangible value that like it's a spiritual connection. Like the only kind soul. Of parallel that is
there a soul to handmade items?
And well, the only parallel I can come up with is my buddy Nick, who he's a flower guy. He loves being outside. He's a gardener. He's not a camper. And one time he was like, "Why do you fucking camp? Like it's literally masochism. You're punishing yourself in not having any modern technologies just so that you can like say you did it." And it's a fair point because you know what? Living in a house is objectively fucking better than living in a tent. And yet, when you go out into the woods for a weekend or a week or whatever, and you just sit there and you coexist with this world, and you like, I've been overwhelmed by the beauty of just a place in the middle of fucking nowhere and like the hills of New Mexico that just exists in this time and in this moment. Because there is some spiritual aspect to it that you can't quite put your thumb on. And I think it's similar in handmade objects. Like there is a value there. I don't want to say that it's better than, but it is different from mass-produced objects.
Well, just speaking anecdotally from my audience's response, the vast majority, 80%, said that they would pay more for a handmade object. So, like I said, here's two objects that are nearly identical. Just one was done by hand and had those sort of maker marks and the other didn't. And I said, would you pay more for the one that was done by hand? And a lot of people said yes. I would say it's like 75-25. Now, did they actually pay it or did they just offer an opinion? Because when you open your wallet is a little different, right? But
sure.
The majority did say that they would pay more for a handmade item.
There's also an audience bias there, though. Consider your audience versus
fair.
Somebody else's.
Good point. Yeah. Good
for
point.
sure.
Yeah.
Also, like when you're shopping in a store and you pick up an item that was made by a machine, I feel like you're like, oh, there's a blemish on that one. I don't want that. Isn't that a somewhat similar narrative in which the machine has created some sort of mistake, making it a little bit more original versus perfect smooth one that like, you know, it looks like every other one. I feel like the purpose is different because the machine, you expect it to be perfect. However, there's an argument to be made.
I think those expectations are important though, because you expect the thing off the machine to be perfect. And when it's not, it feels wrong. And you expect that perfection is unachievable by a human. And so when it is so close to perfect that it's frustrating almost, it has like, there's something different about it. It's a different angle from which you're viewing the thing.
Okay, so we're going long, but I don't give a shit. We're at 54 minutes, but whatever. Because Mary just opened Pandora's box, and she's like, "Well, when you have a machine-made item, an imperfection can be in your bonnet, right? You don't like it, you want to put it back on the shelf. You want the perfect item." So, funny enough, it begs the question: should we be intentionally engineering Should we be intentionally engineering human imperfection into CNC pieces to make them
No.
look more human? And is that deceitful?
Yes. This is the only hard line I'm going to draw. Like maybe in this entire like genre of conversation. Yes, I think it's deceitful. I think that is bordering on like nauseating in some way, that there is no, you are intentionally trying to deceive people as to whether or not this thing was made by hand.
Mary, counterpoint, go.
I don't have a counterpoint. I agree in that. So this was my entire master's thesis. I agree to a point. We shouldn't be deceiving people and replicating human error. My master's thesis focused on utilizing machine error and how you can utilize the mistakes made by the machine as an interesting design affect. So it's not very much. It's hard to describe.
Those
so
are two very different things.
Yeah, they are very different. So I agree with Eric. Like, I don't think anyone should be, designing human whatever into CNC work. I think that a more interesting perspective is understanding where the imperfections a CNC has, and instead of trying to design those out and make sure everything's perfect or whatever, is there a way to utilize those imperfections in an interesting way?
I think, look, we've all, or maybe we haven't all, I've experienced the moment of like picking up an object and looking at it and going like, oh, there's this weird, like, kind of defect birthmark on this piece of wood here. And that's really interesting. This is kind of a cool object. And then you pick up the next one and you realize that it has that exact same defect in it. And it's just a print. And there's something like, your heart just kind of sinks in that moment and you're like, oh, it's not interesting at all. Like there's nothing about it that, like, you're trying to take what's good about the human hand or the tree and pretend like it's that thing versus doing the thing that machine is actually good at, which is making the thing fucking perfect.
Well, I've done a little bit of both. So what I did is I drew something by hand on my iPad and I had a program vectorize it into like computer lines, right, from my freehand drawing. It vectorized it and I loaded that on the CNC and I said carve it. And I asked myself, would that look hand carved or would it look CNC carved? Because the drawing comes from my hand. The machine traced my hand and executed what I drew with my hand. Which is it? Is it perfect or is it handmade? And it was floral ornamental scroll work, and I gotta be honest, it looked hand done.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but in grad school, I programmed a robotic arm to specifically learn a specific graffiti artist's idiosyncrasies and the way that the pressure that they apply for graffiti so that it drips a certain amount, the way that they release the valve so that it makes it a little bit more original to them. Is that the same thing? I don't know. Like, I think these are, I love these questions. The idea of like, so the through line in my master's thesis was like, where is the human in machine? And is it possible? So I don't know. There's not an answer. I just love this topic.
I don't have an issue with either of those examples, if I'm honest, because Paul, in that example, you're utilizing the machine for what it does well, and you designed a thing and you told the machine to do it. That's no different from what a designer does. Let's take
there's that word again. Go ahead. Yeah,
sure. In that case, it is that. Let's take Wendell Castle as an example, right?
Sure.
Like Wendell Castle, towards the end of his career, just made a miniature model of whatever he was carving out of styrofoam, put it in the 3D scanner, and then had the CNC, the 5-axis CNC, cut it out, or later on a 6-axis. That's no different from that. That's no different. Mary, in your example, which I'm blanking on now because I got so excited about Wendell Castle, remind me again what because I did have a good counterpoint.
Graffiti artist.
Graffiti artist.
Graffiti artist. Thank you. So,
yeah,
in that case, like, you might write up a program that mimics that graffiti artist perfectly, and there might not be any ability to differentiate between that person's work in that moment and the AI program that you write up. But the difference is the person can evolve. The AI program can't, right? And so 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that person's hand is going to work differently because their style has changed, or just because like they got fucking arthritis in their shoulder and so their arm moves differently now. And the AI program looks exactly the same and is still stagnated in that moment that you wrote the program. And I think that's a real differentiation. So I don't have a problem with either one of those examples because they're not trying to deceive an audience to pretend that they're a human.
Well, I think we all see that this is anything but a clear answer. We have sort of consensus opinions about where the
CNC?
where we have some consensus opinions about where to draw the lines with respect to when it's woodworking, when it's not. And not that we're right. This is just the three of us kind of talking about it.
Yeah, there's not a right or wrong answer.
Yeah, there is no right or wrong answer. You can obviously form your own opinion.
Speak for yourselves. I'm right all the time.
Well, Eric's right all the time. But I mean, feel free to offer your opinion in the comments, either wherever you're listening to this, or write to us, and we'll be sure to feature your comments. It's a complex landscape. It's definitely a value add. There's no way other than a value. It's not a value subtract. It's a value add. But how we go about using it, and how, whether it's woodworking or not, and whether it threatens some traditions or not, these are evolving topics. And I love that all three of us use CNC technology in our work at this point. So I do feel like we're qualified at least to talk about it. We're not the authority, but at least we can talk about our experience with it. We were going to do a second segment called Feature a Fail, because we have some pretty nasty fails this week, and we like talking about failures because no one ever does. But we're going to save that for the after show because we're some long-winded motherfuckers. We're at 1 hour.
Goddamn right we are.
So we're going to save that for the after show. If you're a patron, obviously get the video feed in the after show, and we will see you there. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have some hot opinions to share with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, friends.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.